The Christmas Tree Proposal by Evelyn Merrick. The winter of 1875 transformed Willow Creek into a magical spectacle. Fresh snow blanketed the town square and festive decorations adorned every storefront, with garlands of evergreen wrapped around lampposts and red ribbons fluttering in the crisp December breeze. The tolling of church bells mingled with children's laughter, while the enticing aromas of cinnamon and fresh-baked bread wafted from Williams' bakery. In shop windows, displays of candied fruits, decorated cookies, and peppermint sticks drew the eager faces of children, their breath fogging the glass as they pressed close to see the treats within. Benjamin Turner stood in his carpentry shop, carefully finishing a wooden music box, a special commission for the holidays. His skilled hands moved methodically over the smooth maple surface, his thoughts drifting to Margaret Williams, the baker's daughter. Their courtship over the past 18 months had filled his life with joy he never thought possible, and now, with Christmas approaching, he felt ready to take the next step. Their story had begun in the spring of 1874, when Margaret took over the morning deliveries from her aging father. Benjamin remembered clearly the day she'd first appeared at his shop door, apologizing for being late with his weekly bread delivery, her cheeks flushed from hurrying through the cold. He'd been so struck by her genuine warmth that he'd nearly forgotten to pay her, fumbling with the coins as she waited patiently, an amused twinkle in her eyes. That first encounter led to many more. Margaret would often pause during her deliveries to chat, and Benjamin found himself looking forward to these brief moments. They'd discuss everything from the weather to town gossip, and he discovered that Margaret shared his love of reading. Soon, they began exchanging books, their conversations growing longer as they discussed their favorite stories. It was during the summer festival when Benjamin finally found the courage to ask Margaret to dance. She'd worn a blue dress that matched the clear sky, and a wreath of wildflowers crowned her dark hair. As they twirled among the other couples, Benjamin knew his heart was no longer his own. The way she laughed as he attempted to master the more complicated steps made his heart soar, and even his occasional missteps couldn't diminish the magic of that evening. Their courtship progressed naturally after that dance. They began taking Sunday afternoon walks through town, chaperoned by Margaret's younger sister Sarah. Benjamin would join the Williams family for dinner after church, and Margaret would bring him special treats from the bakery, always remembering his fondness for her father's sourdough bread. Sometimes they would sit on the Williams' front porch, Sarah nearby with her needlework, and talk about their dreams for the future. Margaret wasn't just beautiful, though her dark hair and warm brown eyes had caught many a young man's attention. It was her genuine kindness that had captured Benjamin's heart. She always remembered everyone's favorite treats, kept aside a few extra rolls for Widow Jenkins, who could barely afford her daily bread, and taught the local children how to make gingerbread houses every Christmas season. Through the changing seasons, their love grew steadily. Benjamin admired how Margaret managed the bakery's books with careful precision, and she appreciated his dedication to his craft. They shared dreams of the future, Margaret's hopes of expanding the bakery's offerings, Benjamin's plans to take on an apprentice. They complemented each other perfectly, her warmth softening his serious nature, his steadiness grounding her adventurous spirit. That winter, Benjamin began courting Margaret in earnest. He sought permission from Mr. Williams to formally call on his daughter, and the baker had given his blessing with a knowing smile. Their Sunday walks continued even in the cold, now with both Sarah and their mothers as chaperones. They attended church socials and winter festivals together, and Benjamin found himself falling more deeply in love with each passing day. As spring returned to Willow Creek, Benjamin started working on a special project, a hope chest carved from cherry wood, decorated with intricate patterns of roses and vines. He'd noticed Margaret admiring similar designs in a catalog from the city, and he wanted to prove he could create something just as beautiful. Each evening after closing his shop, he would work on it by lamplight, pouring his heart into every detail. Summer brought picnics by the creek and evening strolls through the town garden. Margaret would bring her famous apple tarts, and Benjamin would share stories of his apprenticeship years. They talked about everything, their hopes, their fears, their dreams for the future. By autumn, everyone in town knew they were destined for marriage. Now, as another Christmas approached, Benjamin had been honored with a special responsibility. Mayor Hutchins had personally asked him to select and cut down the town's Christmas tree, a task that had always gone to the most respected craftsman in Willow Creek's history. The honor wasn't lost on Benjamin. His father had been chosen for the task 15 years ago, the year before he passed away. Turner. Mayor Hutchins's booming voice startled Benjamin from his thoughts. The portly mayor stood in the doorway, brushing snow from his coat. "How goes the tree hunting preparations?" "All ready, sir," Benjamin replied, setting aside his tools. "I've scouted several promising locations in the North Woods. I'll head out tomorrow at first light." "Excellent, excellent," the mayor nodded approvingly. "We're counting on you for something spectacular. This year's Christmas Eve gathering needs to be particularly special. We've got visitors coming from 3 counties over to see our celebration." The next morning dawned crystal clear and bitterly cold. Benjamin set out before sunrise, his axe slung over his shoulder and his horse, Chester, pulling an empty sleigh behind them. Fresh snow had fallen overnight, covering their tracks as they made their way into the forest. The woods were peaceful, the kind of silence that only comes with new fallen snow, broken only by the occasional crack of a frost-heavy branch, or the distant call of a winter bird. Benjamin had spent weeks scouting for the perfect tree, and he knew exactly where to look. 2 miles north of town, past the old Miller property and up the gentle slope of Evergreen Hill, stood a grove of spruce trees that his father had shown him years ago. "The best Christmas trees grow here," his father had said, "where they can reach for the sky without anything to block their way." After several hours of careful consideration, he found it, a magnificent spruce that stood proud and tall, its branches spreading wide and symmetrical. As he began the careful work of cutting it down, he heard the crunch of approaching footsteps in the snow. "I thought I might find you here," came Margaret's voice, causing Benjamin to nearly drop his axe in surprise. She stood there holding a basket covered with a checkered cloth, her cheeks rosy from the cold. "Father suggested I bring you some lunch, seeing as you've been out here all morning." Benjamin's heart raced as he straightened up, suddenly very aware of his disheveled appearance. "That's very thoughtful of you." Margaret smiled, setting down her basket on a nearby stump. "Sarah's just behind me with Father. They wanted to see the tree, too." As if on cue, Mr. Williams and Sarah appeared through the trees, both bundled against the cold. They shared a pleasant lunch together in the woods, with Mr. Williams telling stories about past Christmas celebrations and Sarah excitedly describing her plans for decorating the tree. Benjamin couldn't help but notice how naturally Margaret fit into his life, how her presence made everything brighter. The rest of the day passed in a blur of activity. With Mr. Williams and Sarah's help, Benjamin finished cutting down the tree and carefully transported it back to town. A crowd gathered as they arrived, their excited murmurs turning to cheers when they saw the magnificent spruce. It took several strong men to help raise it in the town square, and soon everyone was busy decorating it with ornaments, ribbons, and strings of berries. Throughout the week leading up to Christmas Eve, Benjamin finalized his plans. He'd spoken with Mr. Williams privately the previous Sunday, receiving not only his blessing but also a warm embrace and words of welcome into the family. The hope chest was complete, hidden away in his workshop, and in his pocket, he carried his grandmother's ring, newly polished and sized for Margaret's finger. The Christmas Eve celebration itself was everything the town had hoped for and more. Lanterns and candles transformed the square into a wonderland of golden light. The air was filled with the sound of carols, the laughter of children, and the gentle tinkling of sleigh bells. The tree stood magnificent in the center, its candles not yet lit, waiting for the special moment. Benjamin found Margaret near the punch bowl, serving hot cider to a group of carolers. She wore a dark green dress that complemented her eyes, with a red ribbon in her hair. "Would you walk with me?" he asked softly. "Sarah can take over here." Margaret nodded, accepting his offered arm. They strolled through the square, greeting friends and neighbors as they passed. Benjamin led them to a quiet spot near the tree, where a small bench had been cleared of snow. "Do you remember the first time we danced?" he asked, taking her hands in his. "At the summer festival," Margaret replied, smiling at the memory. "You were so nervous you kept counting the steps under your breath." "I was terrified of stepping on your toes," Benjamin admitted with a chuckle. "But when you smiled at me, everything else seemed to fade away. That's when I knew, or started to know, that you were the one I wanted to spend my life with." Margaret's eyes widened as Benjamin lowered himself to one knee in the snow. From his pocket, he drew out the ring that had once belonged to his grandmother. "Margaret Williams, these past 18 months have been the happiest of my life. You've brought joy and warmth not just to me, but to everyone around you. Your kindness, your strength, your love for others, these are just a few of the countless reasons why I love you. I'm not a wealthy man, but I promise to spend every day trying to make you as happy as you've made me. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Tears welled in Margaret's eyes as she squeezed his hands. "Yes," she whispered. Then louder, "Yes, Benjamin, I will marry you." Just then Mayor Hutchins called for everyone's attention. It was time to light the tree. As the choir began to sing and the candles were being lit one by one, Benjamin slipped the ring onto Margaret's finger. They stood together, his arm around her waist, watching as the tree blazed to life with warm light. News of their engagement spread quickly through the gathering, and soon they were surrounded by well-wishers. Margaret's parents emerged from the crowd, her father shaking Benjamin's hand vigorously while Mrs. Williams hugged them both, already talking about wedding plans and how beautiful Margaret would look in her grandmother's veil. Later that evening, Benjamin surprised Margaret by leading her to his workshop. There, beneath a cloth cover, stood the hope chest he'd spent months creating. As he unveiled it, Margaret gasped at the intricate carvings. "Benjamin, it's beautiful," she breathed, running her fingers over the detailed roses. "You made this for me?" "For our future together," he replied, taking her hand. "For all the memories we'll create and the life we'll build." As the evening drew to a close, they stood together under the tree, his coat draped around her shoulders to ward off the chill. The square had quieted, with only a few couples still dancing to the soft music of a violin. "Do you know what I think about when I think of you?" Margaret asked, looking up at him with a smile. "What's that?" "I think about all the mornings I've walked past your shop, seeing you work so carefully on each piece. I think about how you remember Widow Jenkins needs help carrying her groceries, and how you always have a kind word for everyone. I think about our future together, and I can't imagine anything more perfect." Benjamin leaned down to kiss her softly as the church bells began to toll midnight, ringing in Christmas Day. The sound echoed across the snow-covered town, carrying with it the promise of their future together. Years later, Benjamin and Margaret would tell their children about that magical Christmas Eve, about the perfect tree and the perfect moment when their lives joined together as surely as the stars shone in the winter sky. And every Christmas afterward they would stand together beneath the town tree, remembering the night when love bloomed in the warm glow of candlelight, surrounded by the magic of the season.